joining us today for the episode 2 of my What If series. I'm very fortunate today. I've got Graham Todd joining me from Todd and Walker. Today I'll be asking Graham a question that follows on from Stuart Mitchell's question we had last week. So thanks for joining us, Graham.
Pleasure, Kate.
Today the question I'd like to ask you essentially is based around if the scenario of me purchasing a property off the plan. So I purchased a property here in Queenstown. I've got a signed contract with the developer. I've paid a deposit and I'm very much committed to that contract now. Unfortunately, I've just lost my job though, and I can no longer service my mortgage, as I found out last week with Stu. So from a legal perspective, moving forward, what are my options?
Yeah, well, it's a common occurrence at the moment where these sorts of scenarios are arising in real life. So first of all, in these situations, I think communication is the key. So the first thing you'd want to do is sit down with the developer and see what options may be available as far as they're concerned. Let's assume for a moment that the developer says no, you're committed to the transaction. What are you going to do about it? So you start then going through a checklist of what are the possibilities. Is there a bank of mum and dad? That's always and increasingly so becoming a possibility. And if that is to be used, then our advice is to make sure everybody gets independently advised in relation to that, and that if any arrangements are documented, because normally what will happen is that mum and dad will have to enter into a guarantee with the bank, or indeed go and borrow the money to on-lend to yourself. If that's not a possibility, then obviously going back to the developer and seeking extra time to complete the settlement. And
is that something you find they're very lenient on, or
not necessarily lenient? But some can be more flexible than others. It depends upon the pressures they're under.
Yeah, of course.
And also whether or not they may, in that scenario, seek to charge you some penalty interest. It may not be the rate under the agreement, but a penalty interest rate.
Okay.
And that might give you the time to on-sell the property or find another buyer. You know, the key to it is obviously to try and preserve your equity and the deposit that you put in.
And on-selling, obviously being an agent, I know a little bit about that, but for those that don't, there's a couple of different options normally based on the contract that you've signed. What are those options when it comes to on-selling?
Yeah, normally most people will enter into the standard agreement for sale and purchase on the basis that they're purchasing in their own name or as nominee.
Okay.
So if it's that scenario, then you can always do a deed of nomination and appoint a third party as the purchaser.
Yeah.
That's the most ideal situation because it doesn't bring in the possibility of what is known as the bright line test. Because you haven't actually taken up occupation of the property, even if it was going to be for your own future home, you may have a scenario where, because you're selling within a 5-year period, you're required to return any increase in value and pay tax on that.
Right, okay.
So that's something just to be aware of.
Right.
But the ideal situation, as I said before, is that if you can on-sell and at least get your equity back in that situation.
Okay. You know, we are seeing a little bit of that at the moment. But what happens, say, if I've got a contract that doesn't allow me to on-sell? There might be a restriction in place that's set by the developer or a covenant or something like that. What are my options from there?
Well, if you've exhausted all your options and you have a situation where you might otherwise be able to on-sell other than for the covenant, which is registered on the title by the developer, or in this case it would be in the agreement for sale and purchase, then you may have to look at seeing what are the scenarios available for effectively getting rid of that covenant.
Okay.
There is a provision under the Property Law Act where you can apply to the courts to obtain an order for a covenant to be set aside on the basis there's been a change in circumstances. We haven't actually seen that tested yet.
Right. I was just about to ask you, do you think they'd be lenient at the moment based on the current situation?
Well, I think, as we all know, this is an absolutely unique event and something that nobody ever anticipated. These are not people's faults. And if it could be shown that in all other respects they would have been able to settle had it not been for COVID. I think that's pretty good ground for seeking that audit.
Okay, all right. Well, there is another option I want to discuss that people might not be open to or understand is vendor finance. Is that something you see much of?
I haven't seen a lot of it at the moment because often developers are borrowing as well, of course.
Yeah,
and
true.
They have to repay the money.
Yeah.
But that might be an option in the list that you go through and check off. Certainly one that's worth exploring.
Yeah.
And you'll normally get a quick answer whether it's a possibility or not.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Thank you, Graham. I think something you touched on in the beginning is really important, and actually Stu talked about it last week as well, which was communication. I think now being involved in real estate for a few years, I feel that it's always better to be open and honest with your advisors, your mortgage broker, and your solicitor from the offset as soon as you've been made aware that your situation has changed, and that just allows them more time prior to settle in to try sort you out a situation. So my advice to you would definitely be open and communicate. People like yourself are there to help, and also myself as well. So thanks so much for joining us today, Graham. It's been great, and we'll catch you next week.